to Boulder, before I went to California, before I went to Las Vegas, there was a man there, I want to tell you this little background, who worked in a record store on the hill across the street from Tulagi's that I previously mentioned. And this is where the college kids bought stereos and records. There was a fellow who worked there, and he was from Australia, I believe. His name was Richard O'Sullivan. And I got talking with him one day, and he started teaching me about a lot of things in music that I didn't know about. And I started thinking, I'm learning more from him than I am over there at the school. With the exception of a music appreciation class where I learned about Renaissance sacred music, and a very amazing experience where the famous string quartet, the Hungarian string quartet, was in residence, and anyway, those were really good experiences. But Richard introduced me to Ali Akbar Khan. He called me up. He was drunk, I think. About 11 o'clock at night one night, and he said, "Get up here right now." And I went up, the store was closed. He opened the door and he took me back to the room where they demo the speakers. They had a separate room with all these speakers, and then they hook it up to various pieces of apparatus, pieces of, record, whatever, FM radios or whatever, to demonstrate. And he said, "Sit down." I sat down, and he put this record on. It was Ali Akbar Khan playing the Sarod, playing North Indian classical music. And that just transformed me. I transfixed. I mean, it was just like, what is this? This is amazing. And that's how I was introduced to Ustad Ali Akbar Khan. Well, at any rate, he also introduced me to Wagner and some other, just a lot. But at any rate, he told me when I left Boulder with the contrast, he said, "Here's what I suggest you do. You go to at UCLA and study at the Institute of Ethnomusicology." He told me about that. That's how I ended up there. And then he said, when you're done, go to Juilliard, and this is how you get in. You enroll in the extension division. I found out later this is what composer Philip Glass had done also. He says you don't have to go through the rigmarole or anything. You just get into the extension division, and once you're in there, then you can start getting any class you want. So I'll tell you that little story. It's pretty interesting. When we got to New York in September of '66, after getting married, Susie and I went over there, and I couldn't enroll. We were a little bit too late, so I had to wait. I think it was till January. So I enrolled in the extension division, and there was a teacher there, Stanley Wolf. He was the composition teacher. And I signed up for his courses, and there was an ear training and sight singing class. It was pretty elementary, but it was good because I started learning how to look at music and sing it from the score and get the notes right. So that was really good. But what happened was, there's a whole story there. I started studying with Morton Feldman. I won't get too deep, and this is another story. This is classical music. He is respected as one of the great modern composers of the 20th century. And I had walked up to him in a concert soon after I arrived in New York and asked him if I could study with him, and he said okay. So I started studying with him, and I did the same thing when Ustad Ali Akbar Khan showed up, to my great pleasure and surprise. Here's the master himself. He showed up for a concert in Carnegie Hall, and I walked up to him at the end and said the same thing. I was probably shaking and quivering, and he said, "Yeah, so come on up on Thursday." And so I became one of his first American students, and that was great. But the thing was, I was already studying tabla, so he was teaching me tabla at that time. I enrolled in Juilliard, and I wasn't getting anywhere that fast there, and that was the same experience that I had at CU. Wasn't really learning anything, and so I heard about this teacher that was there, and her name was Madame Longy. She was French, and the story was that she was this terrible, horrible woman, this terrible teacher, and that she flunked everybody or just barely passed them, and she would yell at people in the class. And she was really demanding, and she had no sense of humor. And I said, That's my teacher. I'm on out of this school, but suddenly I hear about her, and I said, if I can study with her, I'll stay another semester. So I went up to the office, and they said, well, you can try out for that class, but you have to have perfect pitch. Well, I don't have perfect pitch, right? So they said, well, you have to go to Mr. Balaban, the conducting teacher, and he'll test you. So I said, oh, okay. So I waited a week, and during that week, I realized that I can hear music in my head, and I could hear Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and it was in C minor. At the beginning, da, 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 da. So I memorized the recording of that was in the correct key, and then I went to Mr. Balaban, and he said, give me a note, and so I'd hear Beethoven's Fifth Symphony recording, and then I'd jump to whatever note, because I learned how to jump around to different notes from the other class, that ear training and sight singing, and so I faked my way into the class, and then I got there, and then she'd say, this was conductor and composer ear training, and it was the third year. I had about 5 people in there, and they were all really good, right? They were all studying, because Leonard Bernstein, that was his teacher too. And so he wasn't there then, but I mean, I found out later that he studied with her, thought a great deal of her. So she would start the class out, she'd look at somebody and she'd say, give me a B. And you had to sing her a B, and I'd go to my little, conversion program up here, and I'd give her a B, and then we were allowed to continue. And then from there, that was it. From there was no more B's or A's or anything else. So I mean, she just launched in, and she had these exercises. One of them was you couldn't see her keyboard on the piano, and she'd just go like this on the keys, and then she'd say, tell me what notes I'm playing, and you'd have to spell out this chord, and it was just some big dissonant chord, because this is modern classical music, so all the discords and complexity and all that. And so I failed miserably at that. And then we had atonal singing. She had this book that was called Atonal Singing. There were no keys. It was just da 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 da. Here you're singing, oh, da, 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 da. So I got through that one. And then we had to play Bach chorales. They were in 4 parts in the old notation, they called this movable C clefs. So you had to learn these clefs, and you had to play from 4 different staves on the staves or whatever it is on the piano. And we had another book that I still have this book. They're pieces, they're piano pieces, but exercises that you can play on the piano, but the clefs change. I mean, suddenly they had about 6 different clefs from the old school clefs, and they changed all over the place. The point of this was that when the end of the class, you were at the end of the 4 years, you had to go up on the stage, and she would plunk a score down on the piano, and you had to look at the score and play it on the piano. And the score, you see, if you know anything about orchestration, it would be a Haydn or a Mozart score. And back then, the horns are written in F, and the trumpets might be written in B flat, or they might be written in F. In other words, you had to transpose them, and it had the same. Using the old clef basically did the same thing, and it was a brilliant thing. And if you got all the way through this class, you really knew how to conduct, and you really could dig into these scores. I think it was really primarily a conducting class. But I would go home, and I'd spend 8 hours on this stuff, and the only one that I excelled in was the rhythmic ones. And she'd tap her feet, she'd get her foot going like this, and she'd go da 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 dun da 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 da, and you had to write it down. I could do that because I was studying tabla, and I used to practice this convoluted rhythms and all that. And all the time when I was riding the subway, I would sit there. Let's do 3 against 2. Dun, 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 dun. Now 5 against 2. Dun, 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 like that. So I could hear what she was. It was crazy stuff. Like one measure would have 7 in it, and then the 7th beat was tied over the first measure of the first beat of the next measure, which was in 5. You know, so you had to go da 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 da. You know, it's just crazy. So. I failed that course, and I learned so much from it because I never cared about grades. You know, I gave up on grades when I first went to Colorado University, and they wanted me to take sociology, and 800 people in an auditorium teaching something that I didn't give a damn about, and a bunch of other garbage. And so I had this old man. He must have been 95 years old. Well, maybe not that old, but he seemed to be at that time, and he would just say, now you have to take gym and ROTC or I don't know, all this junk. And I'd say, well, I'm going to next semester or whatever. And I just would just do that and just take the music courses, which I wasn't learning anything from. So at any rate, I never accumulated any credits. When I was at UCLA, I was in addition to the ethnomusicology, I was auditing really good, pretty good classes in orchestration, and I mean they were really good teachers. Gardner Reed, I mean really excellent teachers in different subjects, and I just audited them. So I never went for any kind of degree or any of that kind of thing. But at any rate, I was so excited when I failed that course. I saw one of the teachers, Stanley Wolf, who was the composition teacher in the composition class for the extension division. And I said, oh, Mr. Wolf, guess what? I failed Madame Longy. I'm so excited. And he said, they didn't know what to do with me. So here I was studying with Morton Feldman, who's the most modern composer in the city. I mean, he was really, really out there, right? And he was amazing. And I loved Morty. And I learned a lot with him. I've studied privately with him for 2 years. And they were totally freaked out that I was studying with Morty, and I was working in the studios with rock and roll music and going to Juilliard, right? But in this class that I took in the extension division, we had this opportunity to write music, and Stanley Wolf would bring students in to play it. And that was great. I never had any of my music played, and I really haven't since either, as a matter of fact, except for one occasion, 2. And then some in all these years. I must be pretty good. So, at any rate, I came in with this piece. It was my card piece. I was into John Cage, because John Cage was Morty was, if you've ever heard of John Cage, very, very avant-garde composer. Morty and avant-garde, Morton Feldman, I call him Morty. Everybody did. Friends. And they were together in the early 50s, this movement that they were, until Morty left, because Cage was into, you don't write music, you bang on things and, you throw dice and come up with notes. And at any rate, Morty was into a different thing. He wanted to compose discordant music, so he composed it. So he was kind of separated from Cage. And so I'd go up to Morty's to study, and he had original paintings by Franz Klein and Jackson Pollock, all these modern guys. Pollock's the one that threw paint on, like that. And he'd take me to parties and all these modern paintings, and I mean, it was pretty amazing. So I was doing that and working in the studios in New York. And I came into Stanley's class with my composition. It was on cards. I still have that. Flash 3x5 index cards. And I'd write on there, play these 3 notes anytime you want. And then another one would say, wait 2 minutes and then play this chord for the piano. And then I found out which instruments, he told us before, I had he brought in a tuba, I remember that. And the tuba, I had written stuff for him to do, and they could do it whenever they wanted. So this is all the Cage stuff, where you leave it up to chance. And the tuba player had a great time. He said, I've never had a chance to really play like just It's just over there, you know. But anyway, what happened was, well, Stanley would record these compositions. And so when all the musicians were set up and he had no idea what was going to happen, he said, okay, and he clicked on the recorder. and nothing, nobody played anything because it was just so happened there wasn't anybody decided not to play anything right away, right? He's sweating bullets over there. What's happening? No one's playing anything and the machine's on, right? I'm going, well, this is a Zen moment right here. So at any rate, at the end of this whole thing, I wrote a composition called MU for clarinet and piano. I think the original was for horn and piano, French horn. And it had just a very few notes in it, and it ended up lasting 9 minutes. And this was for the final performance of the extension division. It was in the main hall, concert hall at Juilliard, on the stage, and each of the students would perform something, one of their compositions. And we had, just as a side note here, we had one guy in the class, didn't talk to anybody throughout the whole time we were studying. He didn't talk to anybody, and he didn't bring any music in to be performed. He just said he was working on something, he wasn't ready or whatever. So when it was his turn for his composition, he came out and got at the piano, and then he started no music on the on the piano. Elbows, arms, knock on the wood, and he told Stanley Wolf it was all memorized. And I didn't believe it for a second. So then when I came out, I had a clarinet player. I'm not sure. It might have been a horn player. I have a recording of it. There was one that was made in Juilliard. Right now you're probably seeing the score. It's on one page, and it's you follow this line, and every once in a while it intersects with there's two lines and they intersect, and when they intersect you got to look at the other musician. There's two of us, right? I'm playing the piano and the other guy's playing, if it was a horn or a clarinet, whatever it was, and you make eye contact when both of you reach that point, and that kept it synchronized. But there were so few notes in there because I realized I was really one of the, if anybody was the first minimal composer, hey, Morton Feldman is now being recognized as the original. Philip Glass and these guys, they weren't minimal. In my opinion, they weren't true minimalist composers. I mean, that name was something, somebody came up with that name. There was an art movement, and so these guys are called minimalist composers. My piece, there's a note, and then you're just sitting there quietly. And then another note, boom. This was this piece. Boom. Really long pauses between the notes. And I had gotten that idea from, there was a composer named Christian Wolff that worked with, knew Morty really was part of that group. And he had composed a piece that was very minimal. Morty was the really minimal composer. Really, he was truly probably the minimal composer. And we didn't even use that term back then. I don't think it was even applied to anybody at all back then at all. It was just like the term hippies, the media makes it up. And at any rate, I'm pretty sure about that. None of us ever wanted to categorize anything. I got the idea from Christian Wolff, who had a record out of his contemporary classical music that was like that, really sparse. And I slowed it down to half speed. And I never listened to it on 33 and 1/3. I listened to it at 16. I liked it half speed, right? And then I even slowed it down more. And so when in the middle of this piece, these guys and the students in the audience all started laughing. This was interesting. They couldn't stand the silence. They couldn't take it. I mean, I understand it. I remember now, my friend Thars, I think he played the clarinet. He told me my music, when he played my music, it introduced him to the clarinet for the first time. Because he was just playing these slow, long notes on the clarinet, and it was just to get into that note. But at any rate, people started laughing because you're sitting there in the quiet, and people don't know how to react. It's just the same way when the music didn't start with the tape machine. It was the same exact thing. Well, Mr. Wolff, he told me, he says, that lasted 9 minutes. You told me it was 5. And I said, well, I wasn't sure. He said, and he acted like this was this terrible thing that I'd done. And this music was this, because he was in this school of Walter Schumann, who was the president I think he was the president of Juilliard, and I couldn't stand his music. I couldn't stand any of these American composers. They were Bernstein and all of them. I didn't like any of them. The only one I liked was Charles Ives, and he was like neglected till he was about 70 or something like that. However, so at any rate, I found out he had taken my composition up to his regular or another. It was a composition class that he taught, another one, advanced one, and was teaching it to him, showing him.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, I think you were going to ask me how I got in. I got in through the extension division, studied with Madame Longy, and got so much out of it. And then I no longer went to school there.
So during that time you were going to school, you got hooked up in MGM?
All right. We'll switch over to the recording studios, working as a studio musician.